All right, we'll go ahead and get started. I want to thank everyone for joining today. Brief introduction of myself. I'm Ryan Fitzgerald, the product manager for Anderson-Negele. I've been involved for the majority of the past 4 or 5 years on our paperless process recorder development. We've been continuing to design, develop, and now we're manufacturing this recorder for dairy applications across the United States. So I wanted to take some time today to just introduce this technology that we've created to state inspectors and regulators, as we know that you'll come across these devices in some of your states in the near future, and want to provide as much information as possible so you and your teams are comfortable with the technology before you start to see it in your state or have customers asking to install the technology. So thanks again for everyone for joining. So just going to cover the agenda real quick. It was in the email that was sent around with the invitation to this, but we'll basically go through a quick introduction of the product, how it's used in some of the PMO applications that we're all familiar with. Then we'll go into a little bit more or a quick overview on just where this product is in the whole approval process and our journey to get a memorandum B for this technology. We'll then dive into the meat of this presentation is going to be around product training, and I've tried to tailor that as much as possible to regulators and inspectors, questions, concerns that you and your teams may have as you see this technology for the first time, or again, as customers, end users, processors start to inquire about this or are using this in various applications within their dairy plants. We'll then touch briefly on using Legendary, our web-based software that accompanies the PPR, and how you may use that in the future when doing a 90-day plant inspection or check rating. And then most importantly, I'm going to leave you with some additional resources, how to get some help in where some of the application guides are that have been created that outline in further detail what this product is, how it meets the PMO, and how you and your team can use those application guides to gain confidence as you're becoming familiar with this technology. I'm going to cover as much as I can here. We've only blocked an hour, and I'm going to try to keep it actually a little bit less than that, so we leave plenty of time for questions and answers along the way.
Meet Joe. Joe works at a milk plant as a quality assurance manager. Now, Joe's job is to make sure the milk from the dairy is safely pasteurized according to the Pasteurized Milk Ordinance regulations, and that the processing records are accurate, complete, and ready for audit by the local health authority. Now, it becomes challenging for Joe when events are not properly notated on charts, or the recorder runs out of ink, or doesn't print clearly due to mechanical failure. Sometimes charts are hard to read because they're wet or damaged, and sometimes charts get misplaced. To all the Joes out there, we present the Anderson-Negele Paperless Process Recorder, the first paperless process recorder and software to be compliant with FDA and PMO regulations for milk pasteurization. With the Paperless Process Recorder and PR and Legendary workflow management software, there is no paper to be lost or damaged. And dry pens and mechanical failures are a thing of the past. Digital records are organized, and secure and approved chart records are always audit ready and available on the cloud. Now Joe can focus on the quality of the product and not waste his time fixing the quality of the charts. Learn more at Anderson-Negele.com.
So kind of just a fun video there that our team has created, but wanted to just align everyone. I'm sure you've all spent enough time in the plants doing your jobs as inspectors and regulators that you've seen some of those and hopefully can resonate with some of the problems that we know exist today with our paper recorders and some of and really any paper recorders that are in the plant, you know, are prone to those mechanical failures. Over time, they are inevitable. So we're excited that we have a solution to that today, you know, for both the STLR and SFLR applications within pasteurization, but then also in some of the non-pasteurization applications, the same PPR, paperless process recorder, can be used And this slide kind of demonstrates that, you know, the various applications that we're typically seeing paper recorders today within our dairy and dairy product plants is those cold storage silos, CIP, and various HTST or other pasteurization applications. The PPR is a drop-in replacement, so we've made it as simple as possible for a plant to replace the existing paper recorder in any of those applications with this paperless process recorder. So it's the same size box, pull one off the wall, put the other in place, all the same sensor inputs. And in the case of pasteurization, the flow diversion valve switch, micro switches, all wire into the PPR exactly the same way as they would have in our AV series recorders. A key difference with this technology, though, is the legendary software. So instead of creating those paper records and reviewing the paper and signing off and approving those records physically, we're actually going to do that through the legendary software going forward. So the PPR communicates with this legendary software that's cloud-based. So you log in via the website, and it actually creates those records as an image, sends it to the cloud, and then for the quality team or for auditors, inspectors, and regulators, they can log into the legendary software and view any record image that's ever been created. They can add annotations from there if necessary, or most likely they can complete the approval workflow as a PCQI or any other approvers are required to do throughout that process. I just want to touch quickly on, you know, where we've come from and where we're going. So many of you may know that the PMO was modified about 10 years ago to allow for electronic recording, though today there's still no commercially available paperless process recorder for pasteurization, and we feel like we've actually changed that. We've overcome that milestone and have that technology available today, and it's been quite a journey to get there. Starting with a lot of feedback from regulators like yourselves and inspectors and end users in dairy plants and processors to make sure that we understood the requirements of this technology to actually build a replacement for the paper recorders that everyone is familiar with today. So there's a lot of iteration back and forth with regulators and customers that ultimately got us to the product we're at today. We've gone through a tremendous amount of effort to document what that product is, how it can be used in these PMO applications, and then we submitted to AMDRC, to the Atlantic Midwest Dairy Equipment Review Committee, in our journey to get the FDA Memorandum B, showing that the device is compliant for use on pasteurizers in all 50 states. So the AMDRC committee has been reviewing that technology since May of last year and has recently voted to approve that technology. And with that, it will move from the AMDRC review to the FDA for some additional paperwork review. And we expect the FDA to issue a Memorandum B within the coming months. But all that's to say that the documentation exists today that shows how this is compliant. So various sections of the PMO, you know, Appendix H, Section 5, Section 6, Appendix I, all about testing. We have created specific documents for each one of those that can be used by the regulators and inspectors to verify that this technology is meeting requirements of PMO, so it can be installed on pasteurization systems or non-pasteurization dairy applications today with state approval. So that being said, I want to spend the majority of the time today really diving into what this product is and when you see it for the first time, get your hands on it for the first time, what to expect, how you'll interact with that. So we've got just a few slides here that we'll spend a bit of time on that really reviews that in depth. And we're going to start and primarily focus today on a PPR, that hardware that was specifically configured for a pasteurization application. And in this case, that's what we see on the screen here, is the equivalent of what would be on the home screen of the PPR. So the physical device that's now installed in a process where the 9900 used to be has a touchscreen display on the front of it. And what we see in this window here is a representation of that home screen. And you can see at a quick glance, it has all of the critical information that a operator needs to diagnose the state of their process in that HTST system. And in this example, specifically, we have both STLR and SFLR. Obviously, not every system out there has that. The cold product on the cooling side of the process may or may not be captured as well, but really a one-to-one replacement for the 9900 that we have available today, just shown here with all the options. So I'll go through these, step by step on what we're seeing on the screen and how it may be relevant to you folks as inspectors. Information starting along the top, here's some of our menus and other buttons that will get us to different areas of the PPR. If we're trying to review, software version information or get to menus to do calibration or configuration changes, all of that would be in this menu. The benefit of this touchscreen display that's on the PPR is it's a lot easier to navigate than the 9900 or the other paper recorders, just because there is that graphical user interface. We're able to display a lot more information. So we've got great feedback that it's easier to find what you're looking for, whether that's the calibration or configuration. Coming across here to the right-hand side, we have an indication of the run program jumper. And I'll get into that in a little bit more depth in just a couple minutes. But to get it out of the way up front, the configuration and calibration parameters that are critical to ensure the public health controller is working as expected are going to be inhibited from changes the same way that they are on the 9900 today. So once the inspection process happens, that the testing happens exactly the same way that it works today. As a regulator, you would ensure that that run program jumper is in the run position, which would inhibit certain changes. You would put a wire seal over that device. And again, we'll cover that in just a little bit more detail in a minute, but there is an indication of that right on the home screen of the PPR. The view chart button is how you would see the most recent recorded data. So if you are going through process testing, say testing the cut in, cut out process, this view chart button is how you would get from the home screen where current data is displayed to a recent chart view where the last 30 minutes of data is displayed. And from there, you can actually change that time period to see essentially any time frame you want. Going back multiple years of data is all stored within the recorder. Coming across here, there's the annotation section that the operations team uses to add critical information to the record. Things like product name, volumetric totals, cut in and cut out can be done. That annotation process is enabled for operators or for quality teams, whoever that may be, to add the information they need to comply with the PMO right from the home screen. So these are actually each drop-down menus where the operator or whoever that is from the plant can quickly add the information they need to make the charts compliant to the PMO and ultimately to create those records that meet PMO requirements. As we continue to work down the home screen of the physical device that's installed in the plant, there's 4 quadrants here on the STLR configuration Starting with our STLR temperature display, there's a bar graph under that display that shows whether we're above or below the cut-in temperature. So as we're doing cut-in, cut-out tests, if the PPR is recognizing that we're above the cut-in temperature, this bar graph turns green. As it continues to go higher and higher, we know that that's okay. We're ultimately heating the product to a safe temperature. If it comes down to the left here, indicating a lower temperature, as soon as we cross our set point that's displayed on the home screen as well, this bar graph would turn to red, and we'll see that in just a minute. The last thing in this section is the operator has the capability of changing, or I should say selecting, the cutout temperature directly from the home screen. Again, similar to using an AV series recorder today, they have the capability of selecting that set point. Even while they're in run mode, we know that there's multiple temperatures depending on multiple products that may be pasteurized on a single pasteurizer. So they can do that directly from the home screen. As they do that, the set point, this is the cutout temperature, would be updated automatically. So the operator has a clear indication of what the process temperature is, what their set point is, and the visual indication of are they above or below, indicating, should they or could they be in a forward flow state, yes or no. That micro switch feedback from the flow diversion and leak detect valves on the HTST are indicated in the top right quadrant here. Very similar to the green and red LED indicators we have on the AV series recorder today. We have a green forward flow, a red diverted flow, but there's actually a couple of additional states here indicating that primarily used for troubleshooting process, but indicating if neither the forward flow or diverted flow circuit is complete, there's a couple of additional possibilities there that are the same as they work today on the AV, but we just give a little bit more information, such as the flow diversion valve is not detected. So if it's stuck somewhere between forward and diverted flow, we don't have a complete circuit. This would actually become a gray box indicating that we don't know the position of that valve, or it has not completed the circuit. We don't have that feedback. In the same way it's done in the AV today, it would be recorded as a divert, but we're just going to give a little bit of additional information here that it's actually an unknown scenario. We know that it's not forward flow, we know that it's not diverted flow, but something else is happening in that circuit. Coming down to the bottom left, we have the indication of our flow. So a safety flow limit recorder, if time-based metering is used on the system. Very similar, we have the live process value. This would be updating 10 times a second. There's a very quick response for both the temperature and flow indication. Not the static value we see here in the demonstration, but a live value, continuously fluctuating as is the customer's process. Similarly, again, we have our critical set points right on the home screen. These cannot be changed. We know today that loss of signal set point and high flow set point are not variables. They should be configured before the device is sealed and put into run mode. But we do give a little bit of additional information, from a quick glance to the operator, and also very useful in the inspection process or testing process as we're testing to Appendix I, because we're going to do that loss of flow test. We're going to do that high flow test, and the same green-red bar graph is going to be used. So if our flow drops down below our loss of signal set point, 10 gallons per minute in this case, the bar graph would go red. If we start flowing too quickly, and we would not be safely pasteurizing product based on the length of our hold tube and the salt test that was previously performed, we're actually going to go red again. So we know we can't flow too fast. We know we can't flow too slow, or that safety factor is built in there based on the PMO. And all of that information is displayed right on the home screen, making it easier than ever before to test the system. Lastly, the cold product, kind of an optional input here, may be recorded up to the customer configuration, same way it is in the AV recorder product today. So based on a virtual training session that we're in here, we don't have the capability of really doing a live demo like I'd like to with the technology. But what I'm going to do next is show the same information just in a different state. So we'll go from a forward flow state where we're above our process temperature and in the correct flow range, the safe flow rate range on our process, to a diverted flow process. And we can quickly see in this case that that flow diversion is caused by our temperature, that the STLR temperature is not high enough to be safe. It's not above that set point. So we have cut out and are currently in a diverted flow state. Just wanted to give everyone a quick visual of what that looks like. So now that our temperature, 154 degrees, is below our set point, we can see this bar graph goes red. Our STLR output is off, meaning that if the process, assuming they're using a legal PLC, if the process is in a pasteurization state, not some sort of test or CIP state, that process should not go into forward flow because we are not above our temperature. And we see that reflected by the valve position feedback. So the majority of testing covered in Appendix I that it's performed on a 90-day basis, or the majority of that's performed on a 90-day basis, will really happen right here from the home screen. We're going to get that live indication. So things like the thermometric response, the salt tests, low and high flow, all of those really primarily happen directly from the home screen. But again, we've created that application guide that goes test by test, and I'll show that in just a bit. But it goes test by test and outlines, what are you trying to achieve, and how do you do that with this paperless process recorder. It covers things like, do you need to be in the run or program mode? If that's applicable, it would cover what state the jumper can be in or should be in to perform that test, along with where on the PPR you should be looking, where you'll find that critical information that you need to perform the test. If it's something like the thermometric response, it would go through the process of where you're looking here. As you see that bar graph turn from red to green, you'll stop your timer because we know that the cut-in process has happened, and then that diverted flow would go to a green forward flow indicator. While I'm talking about that, I'm going to go ahead and just pull up that application guide just to give everyone an idea of what we're looking at here and the detail that's available to you as an inspector or regulator in your team as you start to encounter the PPR for the first time. So I'll stick right on that example of response time. And again, we're highlighting, this is test 5.6 of the PMO Appendix I believe it's section 2 for testing. And it's telling you right away that this can be done in the run or program mode, telling you how the PPR uses the STLR output to control the process, typically through a PLC. Give some additional information here on where in the operating manual this is covered in more depth. So if there are still questions about how PPR's meeting these requirements or how it can be used for this testing process, it will point you directly to the section of our operating manual where this is covered, but then also covers here, what that information is, what you'll need to be looking for as you're validating the response time of the system. And then again, this is just going through test by test and for the applicable tests, step by step of what you need to do, what you need to be looking at. on the PPR and where some additional information can be found if necessary. The next thing I'm going to cover is the software of the system. So PPR is an evolving product. We've gone through that process of getting AMDRC review, and we'll soon have an FDA memo proving that the technology meets the current PMO. But we know that that may evolve over time, and we want our product to be able to evolve over time too. If there's some sort of issue or feature that needs to be added to the PPR to help make our customers successful, we want to do that, and we have the capability of doing that today through software updates. The PPR is connected to our cloud software, Legendary, and with that connection, we have the capability to periodically, and our current goal is to release quarterly software updates. However, we understand that that the system and public health control aspects of the device are obviously going to be impacted by software updates and any potential changes we make. So I'm going to cover here briefly what that software update process looks like, and as a regulator, what you need to do to ensure that the public health controller, the PPR, is being used properly. Since the last time you were there testing it, and you've gone away, you've left for 90 days, you're back in the plant, how can you rest assured that the recorder is still using the same software? And that can be done right through the HMI. So from the home screen that we were looking at just a minute ago, we would have gone into the menu and version screen. On the left-hand side here, we can see an example of what that version screen is, and it clearly lays out what our current software version is. And this is the important part for you as a regulator to know that last time you were in the plant, they had version 7.5.2 installed. You've been gone for 90 days, come back, and it is the same version. We also know that software update process is inhibited by the run program jumper, and that change is inhibited by our tamper evident seals. So if the seal is still intact, you can rest assured that that version has not changed, but there's still a way to verify that electronically, and that can be done as part of the inspection process if you prefer. I do want to highlight though that what we expect to see going forward is as we release software updates, maybe add a couple new features on a quarterly basis, and you as an inspector are in a plant on a quarterly basis, the customers may ask, hey, while you're here, we'd like to cut the seal, we'd like to install a software update, and then after that update is installed, we can go through the typical 90-day process, 90-day testing as part of that inspection. And that's exactly how we would recommend doing it. Is if the customer wants to update that software, do that before you start testing. That way we can rest assured that any changes that were made in that software update have not jeopardized the public health control of the PPR. Anderson-Negele is also working closely with the AMDRC committee. If we are making any changes that we believe could possibly impact the public health control, we will run those by the AMDRC Atlantic Midwest Dairy Equipment Review Committee, just to validate, the approach we've taken, the changes we've made do not jeopardize the public health controller. In general, we do not expect those quarterly updates to affect the public health control. What we really expect to be doing is adding additional features, changing, improving the user interface without changing the specific firmware that controls the process. And we've gone through a lot of explanation of our design with FDA and with state regulators and with that AMDRC committee to ensure that the way we've built this product and the product architecture separates the public health control from the software that typically drives that user interface, that displays the information. So we're quite confident that we can update that software without impacting the control aspect of the device, but nevertheless would ask that and have designed the product in such a way that we won't allow software updates without cutting the seal, and are asking you as inspectors to be open to that if the customer is looking to update their software to a new version we've released. Do that on the front end of your inspection and testing process. And then as you're performing those tests, like thermometric response and cut in and cut out and flow diversion tests, all of that stuff, you're basically revalidating every time that the public health controller is still working exactly as we expect it to and as the plan expects it to. On the right-hand side here, we're showing that there's a list of software updates available on this particular PPR. So we can see that version 7.5.2 is installed. If we click this software button, the install button would initiate that process. But again, the run program jumper indicated on the top of the screen here in run mode would inhibit that from happening. So if we're in the run mode, someone presses install, it's simply going to pop up an error message saying, change the state of your run program jumper before you can perform this change. And here's just a lot more detail on that. I will circulate this entire presentation with anyone that's attended or anyone that's signed up for this training. But here's a lot more information that's pulled directly from the product manual on what that run program jumper, or excuse me, where that run program jumper is. So we're showing here kind of an exploded view. The run program jumper is behind the tamper evident sealing covers. So a little bit different than the way the AV series recorder works today. That recorder, we seal the entire chart platen, so you cannot physically access anything on the inside of the device. We know from customers and inspectors that leads to a lot of seal cuts and re-inspections that are not technically necessary to prove compliance. If something is damaged on our paper recorder today, in almost every case, the seal would need to be cut for that part to be replaced. We've gone through a lot of design review and to ensure that the way that the PPR is built, we only seal the sections that are critical to the public health control, allowing for some parts to be changed, for spare parts to be replaced where applicable without jeopardizing public health control. And I guess the example that I'll give here of what we may see in the PPR in the future is this has a touchscreen display on it. We've heard from several customers that they have tons of HMIs in their plant today. From time to time, those things are going to be mistreated. They may be damaged, and the HMI needs to be replaced. On the PPR, as we look at the inside, this is the inside of the physical stainless steel box here. Circuit boards, sealing covers, the door that's not shown here to the left that holds that touchscreen display is actually not covered in the sealing section. So if we needed to replace that entire display, that could be done without calling in the regulators to cut a seal or to reseal the device. Lastly, a couple things that are still inhibited in run mode. This is almost exactly the same logic that the AV series recorder uses today. Things like input configuration changes cannot happen if we're in run mode. Calibration cannot happen. I talked about the software updates cannot happen. All of those things are inhibited by that jumper being in run mode. So we know that when the inspector completes their testing, they're happy with the way the system is working. They will ensure that that device is in run mode, put a seal on that tamper evident sealing cover exactly the same way they would today with a paper recorder. There's a whole bunch of things though that are not inhibited or affected by the run program jumper. That's things like adding annotations to the record. So if you're in program mode and just annotating, we're doing certain testing or a calibration was performed, you can add that information to the record in program mode, as it has nothing to do with the public health control. The last thing that I'll touch on here is password management. Something that I haven't really talked about yet is the fact that the PPR, when you add annotations, every time you do that, it's going to ask for a password, or excuse me, a PIN number, so we know exactly who added the annotation. I just want to highlight here that the user management and password management is not inhibited in any way by the device being in run mode, as we know that those things need to be continuously maintained and updated as we have turnover in the plant and people change or people forget their passwords. So I've talked a whole bunch about the PPR already. What I want to cover next is what this device is creating, and we're going to do that by watching a quick video on the record image that's created by the PPR. So the way to think of this is at the end of a process period, say a 12-hour pasteurization chart, we're going to create a record, and this video is going to walk through in more detail what that record looks like, and as a regulator or inspector, the critical information that you'll be looking for.
In this training module, we will cover the key elements of a typical PPR record. At the end of the scheduled record period, the PPR will automatically create a static record image and upload it to Legendary as revision 1. Each record image will contain the following elements: record data, process data and annotations, including the event pens and scales, along with record approvals and users. PPR records automatically capture critical plant information, the record name, time period, and record revision to ensure complete records are generated and uploaded to Legendary for review and approval. Process data on PPR records, including sensor inputs and STLR SFLR event pens when configured, are automatically recorded at all times while the PPR is powered on, eliminating the possibility of a process not being recorded. Inputs, event pens, and chart scales, as well as the time period of a record, are all elements that are pre-configured by the plant to ensure the right data is being recorded for your process. Annotations can be added to the record by any authorized PPR user. In the sample annotation ACID, we can see that the left side of the annotation text indicates the point in time that the annotation is referring to. The initials of the user and the timestamp of when that annotation was added were automatically captured by PPR and added to the record. As users add annotations through the PPR, the username list continues to update, indicating all users who have added information to the record. The approval section of a record is always blank when the record is first generated at revision 1. As approvals are added either through the PPR or Legendary software, the revised record image is created at the PPR with an increased record revision. In this example, we can see that the quality manager, Jane Doe, added a quality approval to a record 2 days after it was originally created. When the information was added to the record image by PPR, it automatically updated the revision from 1 to 2. The same incremental revisioning scheme is used by the PPR when additional annotations are added to a record period after the record chart image is originally created.
So just kind of an overview of what we see there. The one thing I do want to point out is as we look at a record with a whole bunch of annotations on it, in this case, an example of an HTSD record with STLR and SFLR, I want to highlight to everyone something that is called out in the manual, but may not be intuitive or may just take a little bit of getting used to, is that the annotations show up at the point in time that the operator points to on the chart. So if they're trying to annotate in a diversion event, they can do that at any point in time. All that's to say though, when an annotation shows up on the record, it's the left side of the annotation. If you draw an imaginary vertical line, where that crosses your process data, your diversion, your event pens, and then ultimately the time scale at the bottom of the record, that's where the operator was pointing to. So if they're talking about a product change or a diversion event or anything else, anytime there's an annotation, if there were an imaginary vertical line there, the left side of that is that point in time that they're referring to on the record. So everything we've really talked about so far is on the PPR side. We know that PMO requires review and approval of these records, and typically that's actually done through our Legendary software. So I want to talk briefly about what that software is and how you may come across it as regulators and inspectors. It's a web-based software. The plant can issue you login credentials if you need access to that under your own username, and we'll cover that in just a little bit. But really, Legendary can be thought of as the electronic equivalent to the paper pegboard. This is the repository for all record images that have been created by any of the PPRs within that plant. A quick note on Legendary access when it pertains to both plant personnel and regulators or inspectors is that the plant controls who has access to their records. So they're responsible for setting up and administering all of their operations team, quality team, etc., dictating who has the ability or authority to approve a record, and so on and so forth. But when we look at your roles, there's two common paths that we've heard. Some people that just want to be able to view the records can do so by basically sitting next to the PCQI from the plant. They can log in under their user credentials, and you'll have access to view any record, all the annotations, anything that's ever happened to that using their account. The other use case that we've heard though is regulators that want the ability to add information associated with a record. And the way that might be done today is if you typically initial or sign or make a note on the back of a paper record, what you would actually need to do is contact the plant Legendary administrator and ask for your own user access for Legendary, and that would give you the capability as an inspector or regulator to actually do what we call an inspector review, and we'll cover that in detail in a little bit. Real quick though, the Legendary homepage, again, that repository for all the records that have been created by any PPR in the plant is fully searchable. So finding any particular record is going to be a lot faster and easier than it may be today. But basically this whole table of all those records is the equivalent of that paper pegboard. You can just access the information you need to a lot faster. And once you do so, clicking on any one of the hyperlinks for a particular record would show you that same record image that we covered just a few minutes ago. So next, I'm just going to show one more quick video on the inspector review process. So again, this is specific to users that want the information to add, or excuse me, want the ability to add information to a record as a regulator or inspector.
In this training module, we will cover the process of an inspector using Legendary software to perform a review on a PPR record. We'll start by using the inspector's unique login credentials, in this case an email address and password, to access the Legendary site for a specific plant. Once the inspector has logged into that plant, they can view all records that have been created and uploaded from all the PPRs within a plant to the Legendary software. From there, they can sort based on any of the fields shown above, including equipment tag or the start and end period of a record. When I click into the record details as an inspector, I can see all of the information that's collected on the record image, including process data, annotations when applicable, and the people that have approved this record from the plans team, in this case, a single stage quality review. It's important to note that as I add an inspector review, it will not alter the actual record image or mark up the record in any way. I have the capability of adding an inspection review by pressing this button. Now I can add the comments for this particular record. Once I've typed my comments, I can complete the review to save those comments indefinitely with this record. To verify the comments were saved, we can scroll down to the inspector reviews portion of this record. See that the review status is complete, the name of who added the comments, when they were added, and the comment itself.
So I covered a lot of information today, but the last thing I want to introduce to this team is where you guys can find this information, where you can find additional resources. And we've created a lot of that content to make it as easy as possible for you and your teams to learn and understand how this product, how it works, and what you need to be looking for or doing as you're performing a plant inspection or doing that testing on the system. There's two main resources that I want to highlight here. One is our quick start page. So you can navigate to this from the Anderson-Negele website. The URL is linked here, or excuse me, is included here. And again, I will circulate this presentation, so you'll have that link. Would recommend, potentially saving that as a bookmark. But there's a lot of great information on this page, including the product manuals. Frequently asked questions may be a great resource for you as you get familiar with the technology. And then the other documentation I alluded to earlier, the PMO compliance documents or application guides is what we're calling them for the various sections of PMO that are applicable. So most notably for this group, the application guide for PMO Appendix I is the one I mentioned that goes through test by test. How would you perform this on a PPR with pictures and demonstration and all of that? So this is really a great resource as we're trying to learn how we may use the PPR going forward and how to interact with that device. The other key resource that I want to highlight here is our YouTube channel, and specifically a playlist that exists within the YouTube channel that covers all of the training videos that were actually included in this presentation and many, many more. There's typically 2 to 3 minutes in length, as you can see here from a few of the videos that are shown. So tried to make it as short as possible, but they cover things that really may be applicable for you, or just great information to know that were not shown specifically in this training, like the entire process to install a software update, something like the calibration process of an STLR input. How would we modify that calibration if necessary, and fully recognizing that it's not your responsibility as regulators to do that, but it's something that you will be overseeing or a bystander to as the plant's performing that calibration if the device has drifted since the last 90-day inspection. And in a whole bunch of additional training videos that are included there, we're continuing to create content and add to both of these sites. So really some great bookmarks for you to have and pages that I wanted you all to be aware of. And that really concludes the training. We've got a few minutes left here. So I will take questions if we have them. I guess maybe I'll start by asking Ashish, are there any questions that I can address that were asked through the Q&A?
But in the meantime, I think one thing we could bring up is um, what should the state inspectors, the attendees do, and their colleagues do if they want to learn more about this solution?
Yeah, absolutely. So first couple things, I just highlighted a couple of the pages where there's a lot of information online, the product manuals, all that sort of thing. But also want everyone here to know that we're here to support you and your team of inspectors or regulators going forward. We want you to feel comfortable with this. That's why we're hosting this training session here today. But feel free to reach out to me, to Ashish, to anyone from Anderson-Negele. We'll get you in contact with the right people. We'd be happy to perform, additional training if we can get a group of people together, potentially in person. It is not off the table. Obviously, we can cover more ground a lot faster if we continue to do virtual trainings, but also open to doing in-person trainings. So really feel free to reach out to anyone from the Anderson-Negele team that you may have a contact with, and request more information. If you've got product specific questions, feel free to ask those. But if you'd like to get engaged further, potentially with additional training or anything like that, feel free to ask, and we'll accommodate in any way possible.
Right. I think some of the next question I'm going to ask, the answer that you just gave applies to those as well. But what could the state inspectors and auditors on the call or their team of field staff who were not able to attend the call, how should they take up the situation when the customers are are making their plan to install the PPR at their site, and they're reaching out for the guidance from the state?
Yeah, absolutely. So a processor reaches out to you, say, hey, Anderson-Negele has this new technology. We're ready to try one. We're ready to start our digital transformation. And they will likely do that. Every customer we've talked to is keenly aware of the fact that they need buy-in from you and your team, and potentially FDA or other parties before they'll actually install the equipment. They want everyone to feel comfortable, as do we. But essentially, the next step there would be review their request on a case-by-case basis. So if someone comes to you and says, hey, we want to replace our existing CIP recorder with this, the information is available today to prove that PPR meets all the requirements. It's ready for that application. But again, we understand that there's a level of comfort needed before you're ready to sign off on that. So feel free to reach out if there are additional questions on that front. But then would also encourage everyone to access some of those additional resources and read through that if there's concerns about how they might meet the requirements of anything in the PMO that's applicable. We have documentation readily available to show how the device is ready for those applications.
That's good, Ryan. I think when we post the webinar, we will also have the link posted to access all those materials.
Yeah, one additional thing, if there's no questions right now, I'm gonna just skip a couple slides here and try to show. Give me just a second. I'm gonna pull up one more slide to show this team that talks about how, if the plant is ready to install, but not quite feeling comfortable enough to rip out an existing STLR SFLR and put in a PPR, an option that we have to go forward there and to get both the site, the end users comfortable, along with state and regulatory bodies comfortable with this technology before actually ripping off the Band-Aid and removing paper from the process. And we do that through an installation process with a device we call a transfer switch. So this is how we've performed, side-by-side 7-day trials. Some of the requirements of the AMDRC review and FDA review process is to do that 7-day side-by-side. And we've created a device that we're calling the transfer switch that allows for that, basically by letting the paper recorder and paperless recorder work in parallel or control in series by rewiring the existing paper recorder. Instead of going directly to a customer's legal PLC and controlling in that sense, we can rewire through our transfer switch. We can add a PPR, wire through the transfer switch. And ultimately, this device gives us the capability to let 3 things happen. We can say, depending on basically a physical key position on the switch, we can allow the paper recorder to still completely control the process while we're collecting data here, while we're building some charts, maybe while we're learning to annotate on PPR. We can allow the 2 devices to control in series. So the only way we could ever get to a forward flow state is if both recorders are satisfied in their conditions of STLR and SFLR, or as we're progressing through that learning curve, kind of the final stage before completely removing paper would be to allow the paperless recorder, the PPR, to control that process, have sole control of that process from an output perspective, while the paper recorder is still recording that data. So you can still do side-by-side comparison, but basically transition over time which controller is in control of the process, starting with paper, allowing them both to run in series, and then kind of finishing with the PPR being the sole controller while you're still creating those redundant records. So just wanted to highlight there that is an option. We've had a lot of customers choose that option so far, again, as their teams learn to use this technology, just to allow for that learning curve of how to make annotations, how to approve records, and also as the regulators and inspectors come up to speed and gain confidence in how the system meets all the requirements of the PMO.
Ryan, Seth here. Hopefully my audio is good. This option you're showing, will that work with other manufacturers' recorders?
Yes, it will, Seth. So that STLR control circuit, including the leak detect and flow diversion valve feedback, is almost exactly the same across all manufacturers. The Honeywell recorders, the ABB recorders, we know we're not the only ones out there, and we've designed that transfer switch in such a way that it can be used with any of our competitors' recorders that are used on STLR, SFLR applications today. All right, and I know we're running just a little bit over time. I don't believe we have any more questions here. I'd be happy to, I'll stay on the line for a few more minutes if there are questions coming in, but wanted to take a quick second to just thank everyone for coming. Encourage, reach out to the Anderson-Negele team as you may have questions about this technology. If you've got concerns about how it meets the PMO, we'd be happy to direct you to answer those questions or direct you to some of the documentation that exists that proves how it meets all the regulatory requirements for our dairy applications. But again, just want to thank everyone for coming. Feel free to share this with the rest of your team.